It was 20 minutes to 6 on the evening of January 26, 2011, when a severe blizzard completely paralyzed the streets of Philadelphia. Inside a sixth-floor apartment of a modern building with river views, in the affluent neighborhood of Manayunk, one of the darkest, most controversial, and heartbreaking criminal mysteries in recent U.S. judicial history was unfolding. Sam Goldberg, a 28-year-old television producer for the NBC News Network, was returning from a workout at the residential complex's private gym. When he attempted to open the door of the apartment he shared with his fiancé, he realized something was wrong. The door was locked from the inside by a swing bar security latch. Sam began knocking on the door insistently, but there was only a deathly silence on the other side. Frustrated, he sent several text messages reflecting his growing annoyance. After spending about 20 minutes waiting in the hallway, he went down to the lobby to ask the building porter for help to force the lock. However, the employee flatly refused, arguing that company policy strictly forbade him from leaving his security post. Desperate, Sam returned to the sixth floor and, using his own strength, broke down the wooden door. What he found when he burst into the kitchen froze his blood. His fiancée, Ellen Rae Greenberg, a sweet and beloved 27-year-old elementary school teacher, was slumped on the floor, semi-seated between two corner cabinets, in the middle of a massive, dense pool of blood. She had a kitchen knife with a 13-centimeter blade stabbed deeply into the center of her chest. From this very moment, we enter a narrative where logic seems to completely defy the laws of physics and medicine, and where the judicial system, according to many, preferred to weave a web of silence and influence rather than search for the truth. What started that same night as a logical homicide investigation took a radical and absurd twist when, a few weeks later, the medical examiner's office officially modified the cause of death to label the scene as a suicide. But let us take a necessary pause for your brain to process the magnitude of what we are analyzing. How can a person take their own life by stabbing themselves 20 times? Yes, you heard perfectly right. 20 assaults with a sharp weapon, 10 of which were chillingly located on the back of her neck and nape, and several others in her abdomen, before the final lethal thrust straight into her heart. As if this were not disturbing enough, the medical examination revealed that the young woman's body had 11 bruises distributed in different stages of healing on her right arm, her abdomen, and her right leg. Physical marks of violence that indicated something terrible was happening in that home long before the fatal end. Criminologists repeatedly insist that there is no such thing as a perfect crime, but rather a poorly investigated crime. Stay with me until the end of this video because we will dismantle every clue, every instance of negligence, and every lie of an open case that, 14 years later, refuses to be forgotten. To understand who the victim was and the scale of the void left by her passing, we must know her roots. Ellen Rae Greenberg was born on June 23, 1983, in the United States, being the only and adored daughter of the marriage formed by Joshua Greenberg, a recognized and respected dental specialist, and Sandra Greenberg, originally from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Her parents had met on a romantic blind date in New York City in 1978, becoming inseparable from that first moment. When Ellen arrived in their lives, the family's happiness was complete. Those who knew her remember Ellen as an extremely special child, bursting with vitality, optimism, intelligence, and a sharp sense of humor that lit up every room. Her father remembered with deep nostalgia that her smile was not just any smile, but radiated such an immense warmth that it was capable of giving comfort just by being near. For her part, Sandra highlighted that her daughter possessed the wonderful virtue of always seeing the best in people and situations, approaching daily life with her heart completely open to love. The family moved their residence to Harrisburg, where Ellen grew up surrounded by stability and affection. In 1994, she entered high school, where she quickly excelled not only for her impeccable academic performance but also for her immense athletic skills, especially in batting sports and golf, disciplines where she demonstrated a great competitive spirit and an innate capacity to work in teams. Supported unconditionally by her parents at every step she took, Ellen concentrated all her energy on pursuing her professional goals with admirable determination. When the time came to choose her higher education, she opted for Penn State University, graduating successfully with a degree in communications. Her university stage was a golden era of growth and independence, where she built a solid network of friendships that she would maintain for the rest of her days. With her characteristic enthusiasm, she proudly joined the Lionesses, the student group in charge of receiving and guiding new students and their families through the campus installations. In addition, she developed a great passion for football, frequently collaborating on the institution's sporting field. After obtaining her bachelor's degree, Ellen felt curiosity about speech and language disorders, but while exploring that field, she discovered what her true and authentic vocation was. She wanted to be in direct contact with children, to teach them and learn from them. Convinced of her path, she sacrificed her nights attending evening classes at Temple University and Chestnut Hill College until she obtained her official credentials as a teacher. A few months later, she secured a position as a first-grade teacher at the Juniata Park Academy, in a sector of Philadelphia. The employment granted her the fulfillment and purpose that she had so much craved. Very soon, the school community was marveled by her innovative pedagogical techniques, designed so that the children would feel the classroom as a safe, respectful, and deeply motivating space. Ellen confessed to her parents that she felt immensely happy to be making a real difference in the lives of her little students. It was the year 2007 when Ellen, inspired by the beautiful love story of her parents, decided to try her luck and accepted to attend a blind date organized by one of her close friends. It was thus how she met Samuel Goldberg, a young man just a year older than her who worked in a major media company. Sam belonged to a high-class family, extremely wealthy in the economic aspect and with a notable influence inside the courts of justice because his uncle, James Schwartzman, was a lawyer of immense renown in the state. Making a show of her sweetness and empathy, Ellen connected immediately with Sam, starting a formal courtship that consolidated with the passage of time. After 3 years of relationship, during the summer vacations of 2010, Sam proposed marriage to her on a paradisiacal beach in California. Ellen accepted full of happiness, fixing the date of the wedding for August 2011. While advancing with illusion in the preparations of the marriage, the couple decided to take the next step and move together into the modern apartment in Manayunk. However, behind that facade of perfection, shadows began to stalk. In December 2010, the characteristic brightness of Ellen began to fade in an alarming way. Her friends and closest family noticed with deep concern that the young woman looked anxious, stressed, and utterly dull. When interrogated about her state, she tried to reduce importance to the matter, arguing that she felt overwhelmed by the high demands of her teaching labor and the immense pressure that the planning of the wedding brought with it. Nonetheless, in a moment of desperation, she came to confess to her most intimate friends that sometimes she felt an incongruable desire to abandon absolutely everything and return running to the protection of her parents' home in Harrisburg. When she presented this alarming possibility to Joshua and Sandra, they, searching for her well-being but trying to ensure she would not take an impulsive decision of which she could repent, advised her with prudence to search for professional therapeutic help before breaking her commitment or leaving her employment. At the same time, they made it clear to her that if after going to consultation she still desired to return, the doors of their house would be open wide to receive her. Following with obedience the family advice, Ellen attended on 3 opportunities the consultation of a psychiatrist, who prescribed a medical treatment composed of a drug to control acute anxiety and panic attacks, and another medication designed to help her fall asleep. During the first weeks of January 2011, the young woman manifested to her environment that the treatment seemed to be giving the desired results, feeling notably more tranquil and capable of enduring the daily burdens. Life seemed to resume its normal course. On January 22, Ellen formally sent by mail the save-the-date cards for the wedding, confirming before all her guests the commitment for August. That same weekend, she attended with one of her best friends an exclusive shop to try on bridal dresses and select the suits that her bridesmaids would wear. The pieces of the future seemed to fit to perfection, except for the inclement weather conditions that started to assault the north of Philadelphia. On January 26, 2011, the brutal snowstorm obliged the direction of the school to suspend classes early, sending the children to their homes and ordering the teaching staff to retire for safety. On her journey back, Ellen stopped a few minutes at a gas station to fill the tank of her automobile. Upon entering her apartment, she discovered that Sam also had retired earlier from his employment due to the storm. After sharing a brief time together, Sam decided to abandon the residence to go down to train at the gym of the building, returning approximately 45 minutes later to find himself with the obstruction of the interior latch that would unleash the tragedy. When Sam managed to break down the door after 20 minutes of supposed waiting in the hallway, his first reaction was not to communicate immediately with the sanitary authorities or police. In place of that, he called his cousin and his influential lawyer uncle to inform them in an apparent state of shock that Ellen was slumped on the floor of the kitchen, leaning heavily against the lower cabinets. It was his own family members who ordered him in a commanding way to dial the number for emergencies. The call to 911 was registered finally at 6:33 in the evening. In the recording of that anguishing audio, which subsequently would be analyzed with a magnifying glass by experts all over the world, one hears a Sam Goldberg apparently bewildered, stammering before the questions of the operator. Sam assured initially that he did not see any forced entry nor signs of a fight, and upon being interrogated about the exact origin of the bleeding of his fiancée, responded textually that he believed it came from her head, theorizing in a hasty manner that Ellen had fallen and hit her skull heavily. What was truly spine-chilling occurred seconds later. Following the strict instructions of the operator, who guided him step by step to initiate cardiopulmonary resuscitation maneuvers with the purpose of attempting to save the young woman's life, Sam manipulated the body. It was in that precise instant when he discovered, with a gasped cry, that Ellen had an enormous kitchen knife plunged into the middle of her chest. Upon hearing this terrifying physical detail, the operator ordered him immediately to desist from any attempt at resuscitation and to await motionless the arrival of the forces of order. The medical emergency teams and the police patrols arrived at the apartment on the 6th floor exactly at 6:36 in the evening. The scenario that the first officers contemplated was ghastly. Ellen lay in a semi-seated position between two corner cabinets in the kitchen. On the wooden countertop, the normalcy of daily life contrasted with the horror of death. There was a clean colander full of fresh blueberries that the young woman had just washed with care, and an orange that she had begun to cut into fine slices before being attacked. At 6:40 that same evening, the paramedics formally declared the teacher's death. The registry of the preliminary review of the corpse left the agents present stupefied upon counting quickly a total of 20 deep wounds by sharp weapon, establishing that 10 of those impacts were grouped in a savage manner in the zone of the nape. However, despite the evident brutality of the finding, the police machinery began to operate in a suspiciously negligent way from minute one. Upon interrogating in a superficial way the neighbors of the floor, they manifested not having heard any strange noise nor cries for help through the walls. The building porter affirmed that he did not see any person alien to the property enter through the principal entrance. Upon checking that there were no marks of climbing on the exterior fire escape, that the door was supposedly locked from inside, and that Ellen lacked typical defensive wounds on her hands or forearms, the Philadelphia police decided to buy immediately the most comfortable hypothesis: the young woman had taken her own life. To this hasty conclusion, Sam Goldberg himself contributed decisively, by rushing to inform the detectives that his fiancée dragged a severe frame of acute anxiety recently diagnosed. That gelid night, in the tranquility of their residence in Harrisburg, Joshua and Sandra received the telephone call that would shatter their lives forever. An official voice on the other side of the line notified them with coldness that their only daughter had taken a fatal decision inside her apartment. Despite the state of shock and the heartbreaking pain that threatened to suffocate them, both parents reacted in unison, manifesting to the authority that that was an absolute impossibility. Ellen loved life, loved her students, and never would have chosen an end so shocking and violent. The local authorities asked them for calm, urging them to await the development of the criminal investigation, while they, submerged in the deepest of sadness, moved to prepare the funeral honors of their daughter. During those first days of grief, the Greenberg spouses maintained a constant and affectionate communication with Sam and his family, who showed their condolences by attending in mass the funeral celebrated on January 28 in the locality of Harrisburg. However, the apparent peace of the investigation blew up a few weeks later. The case took an absolute turn when the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office, led by pathologist Marlon Osborne, emitted the official autopsy report formally dictating that Ellen Rae Greenberg's death was the direct result of a crime. The examiner detailed in a meticulous way in his writing that the 20 wounds by sharp weapon, concentrated by half on her back and neck, together with the 11 inexplicable bruises on her arm, abdomen, and leg, made it physically impossible to sustain the theory of suicide. For the parents, the finding of the bruises with different stages of healing was an alarming and painful revelation. Their daughter never had practiced contact sports nor disciplines where she could suffer such injuries, which pointed to a hidden situation of physical violence prior to the outcome. After the publication of the homicide report, the Philadelphia Police Department reacted in an unprecedented way, refusing to accept the examiner's verdict and provoking an institutional war without precedents. Within a few hours, they emitted a public statement where they openly contradicted the examiner's office, affirming before public opinion that the death had not been catalogued in a definitive way as a crime and that their detectives would continue treating the cause of death solely as a suspicious fact. It was from this point where a series of omissions and judicial errors so grave that they border on the criminal began to be committed. In the first place, the scene of the crime on the 6th floor was never safeguarded nor sealed in a legal way by the authorities. To be able to re-enter the apartment to look for proof, the officers had to initiate a slow bureaucratic process of sworn statements to obtain a tardy search warrant. This process delayed several days, and when the investigators finally obtained the legal permission and opened the door, they found that the dwelling had been completely disinfected and cleaned by a specialized team hired by the managing company of the property. The manager of the property declared subsequently that she herself had communicated with the police department to ask if she could clean the bloodied kitchen, receiving not only an immediate verbal authorization, but even the direct telephone number of a private company dedicated to the deep cleaning of crime scenes, destroying forever any trace of DNA, fingerprints, or blood spatter patterns. As if the total destruction of the crime scene were not enough, the chain of custody of the essential technological proofs was violated in a flagrant way. On January 27, barely 24 hours after the finding of the corpse, the influential lawyer James Schwartzman, blood uncle of Sam Goldberg and at that moment president of the Judicial Conduct Board of Pennsylvania, entered freely into the apartment with the police consent. The powerful lawyer retired from the place carrying with him Ellen's 2 laptop computers, both the one for personal use and the one granted by her work at the school, in addition to her smart mobile telephone, her costly engagement ring, and the totality of her credit cards. The Philadelphia police did not recover these highly valuable electronic devices until the day subsequent to the funeral of the young woman, admitting implicitly that they ignored completely what had been done with them during those critical 72 hours, if the systems had been altered, or if compromising files, emails, or messages had been permanently eliminated. The Greenberg spouses, who never in their lives had been involved in a police process, trusted blindly in the promises of the authorities about the progress of the investigation of the homicide of their only daughter. Unfortunately, 3 months after the tragedy, the unthinkable occurred. After a series of secret and closed-door meetings between the detectives of the Philadelphia police and the medical examiner Marlon Osborne, the latter yielded to the institutional pressures and radically modified his official autopsy report. Osborne justified his shameful change of opinion by alleging that he had compared his notes with the report of a person supposedly highly capable and that, taking into account said elements, proceeded to correct the death certificate to declare that Ellen had taken her life by her own hand. The indignation and astonishment of Joshua and Sandra before this institutional reverse led them to initiate a legal crusade that would extend for more than a decade. Decided not to permit that the presumed murder of their daughter be buried under tons of bureaucracy, they searched for the juridical advice of Walter Cohen, an experienced lawyer who had exercised as Attorney General of Pennsylvania and who formed part of their circle of acquaintances. Under his guidance, the family began to battle against the immense walls of the state's legal system, investing the savings of their entire life and hiring from their own pocket 3 of the most prominent and prestigious medical examiners in the whole country to dismantle the ridiculous official thesis. The stumbles were constant and exasperating. Both the leadership of the Philadelphia police and the direction of the examiner's office entrenched themselves in their official posture, insisting that Ellen had self-inflicted the 20 stabbings. The surprise of the parents transformed into horror when they managed to access formally the internal files of the case and discovered that the police substantiated their stubborn conclusion of suicide on some supposed computer searches that the young woman would have realized on her personal computer about effective methods to terminate her existence. For the Greenbergs and their legal team, that supposed computer evidence lacked any probatory value or scientific validity, due to the fact that the telephone device and the 2 computers had remained during 3 whole days under the absolute control and without supervision of the lawyer uncle of Sam Goldberg before being delivered to the police laboratories. Before the persistent blockage in the official offices, Joshua and Sandra understood that the only way to break the pact of silence was to grant a massive public notoriety to Ellen's case. They began exposing their painful struggle in the local media of communication of Philadelphia, calling progressively the attention of the principal national news portals of the United States. Their constancy bore fruits when they managed to get the most famous television program specialized in unsolved crimes and police negligence to grant them stellar spaces to denounce before millions of spectators the scandalous inconsistencies of the official version of suicide. Thanks to this immense media pressure, on March 15, 2019, the prestigious daily The Philadelphia Inquirer published an extensive and demolishing report of investigation on its front page that shook the foundations of the political and judicial power of the state. For this journalistic report, it counted on the independent review of world forensic eminences. The celebrated pathologist from Pittsburgh, Cyril Wecht, world famous for dismantling the single bullet theory in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, examined detailedly the photographs of Ellen's autopsy and was categorical. He affirmed that the case was highly suspicious of homicide and that he did not manage to understand under any scientific criterion how the authorities had catalogued it as a suicide. In the same terms of forcefulness, Dr. Henry Lee expressed himself, the forensic scientist acclaimed for his key participation in the historic murder trial of O.J. Simpson, who concluded in an unequivocal way that the number of stabbings, the angles of the wounds, and the specific patterns of the bloodstains on the walls were absolutely consistent with the scene of a violent homicide. The central and most fierce point of the medical controversy radix in the deep wounds that affected directly the cervical and neurological zone of the young woman. Dr. Wayne Ross, a prestigious neurologist and forensic investigator hired in a private way by the Greenberg family, detailed with scientific precision in his report that several of the stabbings delivered to the nape penetrated in such a way that they crossed the cranial bone and severely damaged the spinal cord and the brain. Ross determined in a commanding way that these severe traumatic lesions would have caused immediately an immense and insupportable pain, the total dysfunction of the cranial nerves, and an instantaneous loss of motor function. Consequently, it was an absolute biological and anatomical impossibility that Ellen could have continued moving her arms in a voluntary way to keep stabbing herself 10 times more in the chest after suffering such a neurological disconnection. The original report of 2011 of the examiner Marlon Osborne attempted to blind itself against this argument by citing that a respected consultant neuropathologist of the state, Dr. Lucy Bailey and Rourke Adams, had examined the tissues and backed that no such damage existed in the cord. Nonetheless, when the investigative reporters of the Philadelphia Inquirer managed to contact by writing the elderly Dr. Rourke Adams 7 years after the facts, her response left uncovered a spine-chilling documentary falsification. The doctor affirmed textually that she did not remember in absolute having participated in that case and concluded that she never saw the biological samples in question, suggesting in a direct way that her name and prestige had been utilized in a fraudulent manner. In the official report, the journalists confirmed subsequently after reviewing the accounting files of the state that no invoice, receipt, log, nor report signed by the doctor existed for Ellen's case. The perfect alibi of the door supposedly closed from inside with an unbreachable security latch also terminated by dismantling itself under the weight of the evidence and the discovered lies. At the initiation of the investigation, The police detectives settled in their official acts that Sam Goldberg found himself in the company of a security guard of the building at the precise moment in which he broke down the wooden structure, validating thus that the door was closed from the interior. However, years later, the general manager of the apartment complex denied the validity of said affirmation by demonstrating technically before the courts that the specific design of that model of swing latch could be manipulated and actioned with extreme facility from the exterior hallway utilizing a thick thread or a thin plastic card. So its closing position did not prove in absolute that Ellen found herself alone. To worsen the situation of the official version, the security guard himself, who supposedly had been witness to the breakdown, rendered a sworn statement before the prosecution admitting that he never was present on the 6th floor at that instant and that he found himself at his post on the ground floor. The recordings of the security cameras of the closed circuit of the building terminated by ratifying the deception, showing Sam Goldberg completely alone inside the elevator minutes before effecting the call to the emergency number. Likewise, a detailed forensic analysis of the registries of the telephone antennas realized and published by the international news network CNN categorically denied the sworn statements of 2 close family members of Sam, who had assured under oath to be maintaining a fluid telephone conversation with a young man at the exact second in which he forced the entry of the apartment. The contradictions and the false testimonies surrounded the only civil witness of the scene. In October 2019, armed with the most vanguard technology of the moment, the Greenberg spouses presented a historic civil lawsuit before the Court of Common Pleas of Philadelphia against the medical examiner's office and against the pathologist Marlon Osborne himself. The juridical objective was clear and direct: to oblige the state to modify the legal typification of the cause of death on the death certificate, changing it from suicide to homicide or, at least, to an undetermined form, impeding thus the definitive archiving of the criminal file. The legal team of the parents resorted to the forensic use of digital photogrammetry, a scientific technique non-existent in 2011. By means of this advanced software, an exact three-dimensional anatomical reconstruction of Ellen's body and of the exact trajectory of each one of the 20 impacts of sharp weapon was realized. The geometric result of the expertise was devastating for the authorities. The model in 3 dimensions demonstrated in an irrefutable way that the depth, the angle, and the force vector of several of the stabbings delivered to the upper part of the back were geometrically impossible to realize by the victim's own arms, confirming the direct intervention of a third person in the kitchen. In January 2020, a state judge dismissed the attempts of the mayor's office to halt the process and permitted that the civil lawsuit advance with success. Despite this immense citizen achievement, the political machinery turned to move its pieces in February 2022, when the Office of the Attorney General of Pennsylvania emitted a controversial report reaffirming in an obstinate way that the death of the teacher had been a suicide, turning to shield itself on the worn-out argument of her previous anxiety crises. Without letting themselves be intimidated by the constant blockages of the Attorney General's office, the Greenbergs, assisted now by the combative lawyer Joseph Pedraza, decided to carry their battle until the most elevated judicial instances of the territory. The constancy of these fighting parents provoked that the civil process bifurcate into 2 aspects of immense legal transcendence. The first of these recourses managed to scale with success until the steps of the very Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, which accepted in a historic way to review if the families of the victims, in their condition of executors and heirs of their patrimony, possessed the legal juridical capacity to impugn and sue before the courts the medical decisions and dictums taken by the state examiner offices. This step before the maximum court of the state produced itself after an inferior court emitted an unfavorable ruling for the parents. However, the civil court itself left settled in its resolution a historic paragraph that destroyed the credibility of the authorities, by dictating in an official way that the investigation of Ellen Greenberg's death realized in conjunction by the detectives of the Philadelphia Police Department, the district attorney's office, and the medical examiner's office had been plagued with grave and unpardonable institutional defects. The second civil aspect, propelled by the defense of the Greenbergs, resulted to be an authentic expansive bomb inside the spheres of local power. This civil lawsuit formally alleges the existence of a criminal conspiracy orchestrated and executed by high detectives of Philadelphia, practicing medical examiners, and assistant district attorneys to cover up the presumed murder of Ellen, manipulating acts and hiding scientific evidence with the purpose of protecting people with prominent last names from jail. For this supposed network of institutional cover-up, the parents demand $1 million monetary indemnification for damages and prejudices whose exact amount remains under summary secret, finding the file currently in the crucial phase of expositions and discovery of proof prior to the definitive trial. The great moral and scientific triumph of the Greenberg family materialized in the month of February 2025. After an intense judicial pressure derived from the lawsuits of the parents, a legal agreement without precedents was reached in which the total reopening of the investigations on the young teacher's decease was ordered. The most shocking thing about this agreement was the presentation of a sworn statement signed of his own fist and letter by the original pathologist of the case, Dr. Marlon Osborne. The medical examiner who 14 years ago had yielded before the police to sign the suicide retracted formally from his posture before justice. Osborne left written registry that, after analyzing in a meticulous way the immense quantity of new forensic medical information, the 3-dimensional analyses, and the neurological expertises contributed by the family, He no longer was in agreement with his own original dictum of suicide, affirming textually that, in his current professional opinion, the cause of death of Ellen Rae Greenberg must be legally classified as a form distinct from suicide. While this historic recognition of error did not modify in an automatic way the official death certificate due to the fact that Osborne no longer exercises functions inside the Forensic Public Administration of Philadelphia, it signified a coup de grace to the credibility of the state. However, when the truth seemed finally to open its path between so much darkness, the sectors most rooted in the system of Philadelphia returned to raise a wall of institutional containment to shield themselves against possible million-dollar lawsuits for negligence. On October 10, 2026, in an extensive, dense, and controversial technical report of 32 pages, the current chief examiner of Philadelphia, pathologist Lindsay Simon, the maximum medical authority of the city, threw to the ground the advances by reaffirming in an obstinate manner the original dictum of suicide in the case of the teacher. In her polemic writing, Dr. Simon admitted openly before the courts that the geographic distribution of the 20 stabbings in the young woman's corpse is certainly unusual and strange inside the manuals of legal medicine. Nonetheless, she firmly sustained the hypothesis that Ellen would have possessed the physical capacity and the necessary force of will to inflict those 20 brutal wounds herself in a successive form. In an attempt highly criticized for discrediting the forceful reports of the private accusation, the chief examiner Simon argued in her report that the orifice and the physical defect found in the victim's spinal cord did not correspond necessarily to a stabbing prior to death, but rather theorized that it could have been caused in a totally accidental way by the medical examiners themselves upon introducing a metallic exploration probe during the course procedure of the autopsy realized in 2011. To top her polemic posture, Simon observed furthermore in the document that, even if it were accepted that Ellen suffered the tremendous wound in the vertebral column at the hands of an attacker before dying, said neurological impact would not have incapacitated her in an immediate form nor would have impeded her to continue moving her arms to keep plunging the knife into her heart. A technical argument that the lawyers of the family and international public opinion have unifiedly qualified as a flagrant insult to common sense, to the logic of human biomechanics, and to the most basic forensic science. Upon analyzing this intricate case from a purely narrative, criminological, and human perspective, it results impossible not to perceive the long and heavy shadow projected by the structures of power, money, and the influences of the upper social classes inside the city of Philadelphia. The unusual speed with which the local authorities granted the verbal permissions to disinfect and destroy in an irreversible way the scene of the crime in the kitchen, summed to the scandalous police tolerance that permitted the influential uncle of the romantic partner to retire in custody without any supervision the telephones and laptop computers of the victim during 3 crucial days, suggest in an evident way that from the official spheres the fastest and least noisy juridical solution was searched for and imposed. It was preferred to bury the scientific evidence under the absurd pretext of an implausible suicide rather than initiate a rigorous investigation that could inconvenience or splash powerful social circles of the community. The retention and the immense impact that this case maintains in the world collective memory are not due solely to the intrinsic brutality of the event, but to the universal feeling of indignation before an institutionalized injustice. It is the titanic and moving struggle of elderly parents against a deaf and blind state machinery, which prefers to sustain an unsustainable medical lie rather than admit a chain of historic police negligences that would carry million-dollar civil responsibilities for the coffers of the city. Each time that any citizen with common sense reviews the expert reports that detail the 10 deep wounds in Ellen's nape, the most elemental logic shouts with strength that a person does not murder themselves from behind crossing their arms in anatomically impossible angles. Ellen Rae Greenberg not only lost her life tragically that afternoon of snowstorm in her kitchen in Manayunk. Her memory, her dignity, and her history continue being mistreated and trampled 14 years later by a judicial system that prefers the bureaucratic comfort of maintaining a closed file to the crude, inconvenient, and dangerous reality of accepting that a violent murderer walks completely free and impugned through the streets of the United States. We do not want to close this deep criminal investigation without mentioning the destiny of the people who surrounded this tragedy. Sam Goldberg, the fiancé who forced the door and discovered the corpse, maintained a fluid contact with Joshua and Sandra Greenberg solely during the first year subsequent to the young woman's passing. From that moment, the treatment between them broke in a definitive way, installing an absolute estrangement. For the closing of our investigation, it was confirmed that Sam Goldberg resides in Manhattan, where he performs successfully as a film and television producer. He contracted marriage in January 2014 with Caroline Flynn, a woman belonging to a wealthy family of real estate agents, with whom he shares his life and has had 2 children. It is fundamental to recalculate that, despite the intense suspicions of the Greenberg family and of the evident contradictions in the telephone registries and building security, Sam Goldberg never has been signaled, mentioned, nor formally imputed as a suspect or investigated by the police authorities in relation with the death of his fiancée. The civil case continues its slow and uncertain advance through the superior courts of Pennsylvania, without there existing in the horizon a clear date of definitive resolution for the desperate parents. Arrived at this point of the story, the question for reflection results totally inevitable and obligatory for all of us. Is it acceptable inside a democratic society that the institutions of justice validate scientifically that a woman is capable of stabbing herself 20 times, 10 of them from behind penetrating the bone of her own skull, only to not reopen a police scandal and protect the last names of the powerful? Until when will the traffic of influences and the socio-economic status weigh more than the three-dimensional forensic evidence presented by world eminences of medicine? International public opinion has a highly clear and unanimous verdict in their hearts, but the official offices of Philadelphia prefer to continue parapet behind their 32 pages of cold and bureaucratic institutional silence. Thank you very much for accompanying me throughout this detailed, rigorous, and respectful analysis of one of the most frustrating, dark, and polemic cases in contemporary American criminal history. The memory of Ellen Rae Greenberg deserves to be told step by step, detail by detail, in every corner of the world, until the system sees itself obliged to erase the word suicide and places finally the term homicide on her death certificate. If you value this type of journalism of deep investigation, if you believe in the unceasing search for truth and want us to continue granting a potent voice to all those victims who can no longer defend themselves, do not forget to show your valuable support to our channel. Subscribe so as not to miss any of our investigations, leave your like on this video, and share it on your social networks so that this history reaches more people and the flame of justice does not go out. Remember to activate the notification bell to be aware of our next premieres. I am John Crime, and we will see each other very soon in the next story of Deep Human Darkness. Stay safe and see you soon.